What if a father believed his own child would be the one to end his life? That single thought is enough to stop anyone in their tracks. For years, people around Rob Reiner noticed tension that went far beyond normal family issues. Private fears, strange comments, and uneasy moments started to raise questions. Some say this belief was not based on anger alone, but on patterns that kept repeating behind closed doors. The more you look into it, the more unsettling the story becomes. Stay tuned as we uncover the disturbing claim that Rob Reiner believed his own son would kill him.
I think I'm lucky in the sense that I have parents that care about me.
We know from multiple sources, as well as TMZ reporting, that those two are in fact director and actor Rob Reiner.
Not long ago, Rob Reiner spoke publicly for the first time about his defiant son, sharing a family story he had almost never discussed before. Sitting under studio lights, he leaned forward slightly. It wasn't the posture of a director used to commanding large crews. It was the posture of a man unsure if he had the strength to continue speaking. The host had just asked a soft question about family. Reiner didn't respond right away. He pressed his lips together, inhaled slowly, and looked down at his hands, which were tightly folded. The pause stretched longer than expected. "There are things you only understand once you become a father," he said quietly. "And there are things you still can't fix, no matter how long you've been one." He spoke openly about his son, Nick Reiner, without trying to soften the truth. Almost as if he knew that if he didn't say it then, he might never say it at all. Nick was born in 1993 to Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, his wife since 1989. Growing up as the child of one of Hollywood's most respected directors meant Nick was surrounded by film and creativity from the start. Money was never an issue. Opportunities were always within reach. Doors opened easily because of the Reiner name. But there was something he never truly had. Something people on the outside couldn't see. He was never free to just be ordinary. From a young age, Nick lived under pressure that didn't need to be spoken. His grandfather was Carl Reiner, a giant in American comedy who shaped decades of television and film. His father was Rob Reiner, the man behind movies that became part of millions of people's lives. Those names were more than fame. They were expectations so large that any personal effort could feel small next to them. Because of that, Nick's relationship with his father was never easy. Nick later admitted that he and Rob were not especially close when he was growing up. Rob loved his son, but much of his life was spent on film sets, moving from one project to the next. Nick often remained on the edges of that world. The love was there, but it wasn't close enough to become something steady to lean on. That pressure followed Nick into every decision he made. He felt he had to succeed, had to stand out, had to live up to the Reiner name. Being average wasn't allowed. Over time, what should have pushed him forward became something heavy. He didn't know how to put it down. The rest of the family found their own direction. Jake Reiner built a career as an actor, writer, and producer. Romy Reiner worked in acting through smaller independent projects. Tracy Reiner, Penny Marshall's daughter whom Rob adopted, also established herself as an actress. Nick was the only one whose path never settled. Not because he lacked ability or chances, but because of struggles happening inside him. The success of others couldn't pull him out of it. And even his family's love wasn't enough to help him stay steady on his own. Rob Reiner continued speaking, still avoiding direct eye contact with the camera. "He grew up around bright lights," he said, "but lights aren't always warm." He paused, then admitted something many successful fathers think, but rarely say out loud. He had believed that a stable home, money, and good surroundings would be enough to keep his child safe. Only later did he realize that there are empty spaces that success cannot fill. Nick's teenage years didn't begin with some dramatic collapse. They started with changes so small they were easy to dismiss. A busy father could easily convince himself it was just part of growing up. Nick began coming home later than usual. Nothing extreme, just small shifts in routine. Family conversations became less common. His answers grew shorter. He avoided eye contact more often. He wasn't acting out. He was slowly pulling away. Rob Reiner said Nick first started drinking at 15, when life still felt uncertain and undefined. At the beginning, it was occasional with friends, nothing that raised alarms. No one thought it would lead anywhere serious. But alcohol was only the start. Other substances followed, arriving quietly and gradually. Nick didn't turn to them out of curiosity. He turned to them because, for a short time, they made everything in his head go quiet. The pressure eased. The questions stopped. In those moments, he was free from the Reiner name. He wasn't Rob's son or Carl's grandson. He was just a young person allowed to exist, without comparison or judgment. When Rob Reiner finally confronted his son about the addiction, he didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He spoke calmly and carefully, like a father who still believed honesty and patience could fix things. Nick sat across from him and listened. He nodded at the right moments. He said he understood. He said he would try. He spoke the way a child does when he knows how to calm his father, even if he doesn't yet know how to save himself. After that talk, things calmed down for a short while. Nick stayed home more often. He kept his word just enough that no one felt pushed to ask more questions. There were no strong signs that things were truly fixed, but there was also nothing that made Rob panic right away. That brief calm gave him room to hope. Not in a big way, but enough to believe the conversation had mattered. Then Nick entered rehab for the first time. Rob rarely spoke about that stretch of time. He only said that he waited and tried to keep believing. When Nick came back, Rob was there. He studied his son's face, quietly looking for even the smallest sign that the effort had not been wasted. That belief didn't vanish all at once. It faded slowly through missed eye contact, longer pauses, and replies that became shorter as time went on. Rob later said, "No one prepares you for this. You start by hoping, then you learn how to lower that hope so it doesn't hurt as much each time it breaks." More rehab stays followed. Every time Nick left a facility, Rob was waiting. No cameras, no press. Just a father standing there. But addiction doesn't respond to presence alone. It returns little by little. Nick didn't fall once. He went to rehab as many as 17 times. There were stretches when he drifted and lived without a home because he refused treatment. After each episode, the space between father and son didn't grow wider, but it became heavier, weighed down by helplessness. Rob Reiner never hid that reality. In interviews, he never claimed he had handled everything perfectly. He said he had done all he could, and that sometimes what you can do simply isn't enough. You can't live your child's life for them, and you can't fight their battles in their place. There came a point when Rob made a choice many people thought was dangerous. He brought his pain into his work. Being Charlie was not created to entertain. It was a desperate attempt to understand and to be understood. The film follows a young man dealing with addiction, caught between his family's love and his own self-destruction. Many viewers saw it as deeply personal. Rob didn't argue with that. He said, "I didn't make that movie to save my son. I made it to understand him." While working on Being Charlie, Rob knew he was stepping close to something painful. He was afraid, but he continued. Not as a director behind a camera, but as a father trying to reach his son in the only way he felt was left. Nick understood what the film meant. They talked, not in long emotional talks, but in short, careful conversations, both aware of how fragile things were. Nick later said that being close, watching his father work, seeing him do what he loved, helped him understand what directing really meant. It also helped him see, more clearly, how much his father loved him. There were no speeches or lessons, just presence, just being there. That closeness let Nick feel loved, but it didn't give him the strength to stop. In the end, he continued to fall, not because he didn't understand, but because understanding alone doesn't always keep someone upright. Being Charlie didn't fix everything. Nick kept struggling. Rehab attempts failed. There were nights when Rob received phone calls late at night, the voice on the other end saying very little, but enough for him to know he had to leave immediately. Over time, those drives stopped feeling new. Rob admitted a painful truth. He could direct a film, but he could not direct his son's life. He also confessed that there were nights when he lay awake replaying every decision from Nick's childhood. The times work came first, the moments he told himself things would work out. And beyond his son's struggles, Rob Reiner faced other losses later in life. Quiet losses, private ones. Heavy enough to slowly wear down someone who had spent his career telling stories about decency and care. The first was the death of Carl Reiner. To the public, it marked the end of a beloved legend, a man known for humor and admiration. To Rob, it wasn't the loss of an icon, it was the loss of the strongest support in his life. Carl Reiner wasn't just his father, he was his guide, his compass, the one person Rob could call at any hour without explanation. For years, Rob lived beneath his father's shadow. It was so large that even success didn't fully lift it. Every praised film and every award carried a quiet question Rob never needed spoken out loud. Carl never used his success to pressure his son. That weight came from respect, not control. And that respect pushed Rob to stand on his own, not to outdo his father, but to deserve standing beside him. Rob once said his father never taught him how to make movies. He taught him how to take responsibility. "My father never told me who I had to be," Rob said. "He helped me understand that once you choose a path, you walk it and accept everything that comes with it." After Carl Reiner died, Rob felt something shift. The voice in his head grew quiet. There was no one left to tell him when he had gone too far. No one honest enough to challenge him, and no one who understood him deeply enough to do it gently. Questions that once had direction now floated without answers. Some evenings, Rob would pick up his phone without thinking, then put it back down. Not because there was no one to call, but because the one voice he needed most was gone. In those small moments, Rob felt something new, the loneliness that comes with age, not from being alone, but from losing the one person who understood him completely. Carl Reiner had been the largest shadow in Rob's life, but that shadow taught him how to build his own light. When it disappeared, Rob didn't just lose a father. He lost the last mirror that truly reflected who he was. And that wasn't the end. Rob Reiner still had one more pain to face, this time tied to the career he once believed would always protect him. For many years, Rob Reiner built his career on stories about love, family, and the idea that people can find their way back to each other, even after drifting apart. That kind of storytelling was exactly what Hollywood once valued. It was also what helped push his name to the highest level in the industry. But as time passed, Hollywood changed. Meetings no longer carried the same energy. Discussions became shorter, more businesslike, and often ended without much interest. Rob Reiner still walked into those meetings fully prepared. He brought scripts, detailed notes, and stories he had worked on carefully over many years. This time, though, the people across the table didn't stay engaged for long. "There were moments when I felt like I was still talking," Rob later admitted, "but I wasn't sure anyone was really listening anymore." New ideas were not directly rejected. Instead, they quietly disappeared. People said, "Let's see," and then never followed up. Emails went unanswered. Scripts were placed on desks and left there for weeks without comment. There was no single moment where everything collapsed. No dramatic ending, just a slow pulling away, so gradual that it allowed him to believe, for a while, that nothing had truly changed. Rob Reiner began to recognize it without anyone needing to explain it. He noticed it in the way people spoke about him, focusing more on what he had done years ago rather than what he was doing now. Conversations often started with, "You made when Harry met Sally," as if the rest of his career was already written in the past. One night, Rob sat alone in his study, flipping through old scripts. He wasn't doing it to relive old successes. He was trying to understand whether he had changed, or whether the world around him had moved on first. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel bitter. There was only a quiet feeling, similar to what he had felt years earlier when he realized the growing distance between himself and his son. "I used to think that if I did the right thing long enough, everything would last," Rob said softly. "But a career, like a family, doesn't work that way. It doesn't leave all at once. It steps back slowly, giving you time to adjust to being on your own." As he grew older, Rob Reiner came to accept that even filmmaking, the place he had always felt safest, could be taken away in small pieces. He continued working. He kept writing. He kept telling stories. But for the first time, he had to face a reality he had never dealt with before. Even gentle, well-meaning stories can stop being wanted. Then came another loss, one that was harder to define: division. In his later years, Rob Reiner became more open about his political views. For him, this wasn't about attention. He felt it was a responsibility. He believed that having a voice meant using it, even when it came with risks. That honesty had consequences. Some people in his audience turned away and no longer wanted to hear from him at all. Old friends kept their distance, avoiding conversations they once shared easily. Talks that used to feel relaxed became tense, then stopped happening altogether. Over time, Rob Reiner was no longer seen mainly as a filmmaker. He became a figure people argued about. This wasn't something he wanted, and once it started, he had no control over it. Even he could see that his role had changed. He was no longer simply the person behind the camera. He was now someone placed directly in the middle of disagreement. The films that once brought people together through humor and shared emotion were no longer enough to bridge the gaps that had formed. Movies stopped feeling like a safe place. Recognition no longer softened the impact. He never took back what he had said. But he also didn't deny the loneliness that came with speaking openly. There were nights when Rob wondered if staying quieter would have been easier. If being softer or holding on to familiar comfort might have kept more people close. But each time, he came to the same answer. If peace required turning away from what he believed was right, then it wasn't peace at all. It was silence bought at too high a cost. Some people reach old age feeling that everything in their life has been neatly wrapped up. Rob Reiner did not. He entered this stage of life carrying many unfinished chapters, not because he lacked the ability to create a good ending, but because life doesn't allow anyone full control. For the first time, Rob Reiner, a man who spent decades shaping how audiences felt, had to live inside a story he could not guide. Looking back, a painful contrast becomes clear. Rob Reiner spent his career telling hopeful stories, while his own life asked him to live with unanswered questions. He didn't turn his pain into speeches or lessons. He didn't use it to defend himself. He simply carried it quietly as part of who he was. That may be why, when people think of him in the end, they don't focus only on his films or his public opinions. They remember a man who tried to do what he believed was right in his work, in his values, and with his family, even when the cost was far greater than he ever expected. That's the full story. If this story meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing stories that are still waiting for their ending. Thank you for staying until the very end.